Hello, everyone. Greetings. You have arrived at the fourth and final day, tears, of Facing Climate Change, the 2022 International Gathering in the conference series Focus on Conservation. My name is Katja Zeliat, and I head international outreach activities for the Leibniz Research Museums. I've been your moderator for Facing Climate Change over the past 4 days with great pleasure, and I'm sad that it's the last day. Just for those of us or you who are joining for the first time, here are the most important things you need to know to participate in the conference fully and effectively. And please make sure you've installed the latest version of Zoom, because most parts of this conference are being recorded and will be made available to you on the University of Cambridge Museum's YouTube channel in the future. To that end, please turn off your video when you are part of the audience. As you know from your conference materials and from the disclaimer slide you saw when you entered this Zoom meeting, you are granting the organizers rights to use your picture if you do not turn off your video. To allow for good sound quality, we will mute all audience members during dialogues and sessions. But if you have any issues hearing, seeing, or communicating during the sessions, please place these problems into the Zoom chat to everyone. We have helpers standing by for you. Do not place content questions into the Zoom chat to everyone or to anyone in particular. To pose questions to speakers during the question and answer period after dialogues and sessions, do not use Zoom chat. Instead, please use the Slido questioning and polling tool that we wrote to you about and that has been on several screens. Go to Slido and enter the code Facing Climate Change, all one word, to take part. Most of all, have fun and thank you so much for joining us. So now we will start with the opening dialogue. Please use Slido again to pose questions to our speakers as they are talking with one another. Beatriz Haspo, please turn on your video. Anupam Sah, please turn on your video. A short introduction to both of you. Beatriz Haspo is the Collections Officer at the Library of Congress, an adjunct faculty at the University of Maryland in charge of the master degree course in Library and Archives Preservation. Welcome, Beatriz. Anupam Sah is the head of art conservation, research, and training at CS MVS Museum in Mumbai. A transdisciplinary practitioner, he works with a systems approach based on interrelatedness and networked cycles of effects and causes, allowing him to engage heritage conservation with other sectors. Go ahead. I will remove myself until the question and answer period, and I wish you a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Katja. Good morning and good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to be here. An honor to be speaking with Anupam. I hope our conversation will be an inspiration to all, and all will participate in our conversation. Right, Anupam? Good morning. I think your mic is muted.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. It'll really be lovely talking to you, and a warm welcome to all the participants who are here today. And we hope to be enriched by their own suggestions and comments afterwards. Thank you so much.
So I think today we want to talk a little bit about education. And I think today we come here with our experiences in different areas. As Katja said, I work at the Library of Congress, but here I am representing also another institution. Actually, I have a different hat today here. I am a volunteer executive director of Apoio Online, Association for Heritage Preservation of the Americas. And this is a nonprofit that has been promoting professional development in the Americas in the Portuguese and Spanish-speaking countries for over 33 years. And I think our experience also talks a lot about the impact of climate change and how we are bringing and educating the new generation of professionals. Anupam has also a lot of experience, right, Anupam?
Yeah, Beatriz. I'm an art conservator restorer by profession. And as they said, we work with communities in the field of heritage conservation, and we've also been linking art conservation with socio-economic development. I have a background in the arts and the sciences, and one's work has taken us across this large subcontinent of India. It's very beautiful, from cold deserts to tropical areas. And the work has crossed various fields of knowledge and experiences in this beautiful land. And we hope we'll be able to share some of that, Beatrice, because when I think the focus is on climate change, and climate is well, it's changing, but climate is so much part of our lives, isn't it? That's what our cultural heritage is about. That's what our culture is about. You know, it has determined our clothes, it has determined our cuisine, it has determined our practices, our rituals. So it's very much part of human life, no? And adapting to change is something that is intrinsic to all creatures on earth, isn't it? Including us.
Indeed, indeed. And I think right now there has been a lot of intentional talks about this, more awareness about this. But I am sure that in India, as well as in Latin America, we have been dealing with this our whole lives, right? So if you talk about, for example, the climates in the tropical climates, right, and the impact of climate change in the tropics, it is real, right? So and then people has been working with this and dealing with this for a long time, and students also, conservators or professionals, have to adapt what they have to do or what they have to face with collections, with their own institutions, with their own resources, which in many cases are non-existing. And I think this conversation now that is more broadly and then impacts, I mean, it involves everybody, will be of immense help for the regions also that are in need of resources, and especially resources in their own language, right? Mm-hmm. Which, for example, Apoio Online has been trying to do for all these years through translations, right? Translating technical texts, so you don't have to learn in another language how to do emergency preparedness and response. So it's trying to empower conservators in this way to deal with the climate changes that they have to do with the collections. Right. How is this impacting your teaching?
So I work, suppose, as a conservator at the CSMVS Museum here in Mumbai. We also run an institution called the Himalayan Society for Heritage and Art Conservation up in the northern Himalayas. And we are collaborating with a lot of institutions across the entire region of India and setting up centers in different regions. And these are geographically all diverse regions with different languages, you know, very much like what you say. And what was interesting that for this particular, I mean, for the audience also, I'll tell you that, you know, a week before this, we had, you know, like a conversation between all of us, and we talked about what we will do. And then we said, let's do a survey with the students across India. And we did that, Beatriz. Yeah. And we did a survey. And what was interesting is when we talked to them about, should we introduce climate change into our art conservation curriculum? Mm-hmm. We realized the foolishness of that, because it turned out to be a very rhetorical question. It was like, yeah, and it was like, obviously, dude, I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, of course. So while there was a very strong, assertive, a vehement yes to it, we also realized in many cases it was also peer pressure. If someone had the courage to say, no, it should not be introduced, it was like, oh, what are you talking about? Yeah, you crazy man. Yeah. So it was interesting that because of climate change being showcased around the world as a very important thing. I mean, if you see IPCC put the risk to cultural heritage due to climate change sometime in 2014, I think, right? So it is then that sort of the term sort of came into play in terms of risk to cultural heritage, right? But by now, because of all the conversations that are going around the world, it is interesting that a critical mass of thought is forming that it is essential.
Right.
Right.
And I think it's, I think, as you said, for some folks, it's very natural. It has been natural for a very long time. It's just that now it's becoming more official, right? And then, as you said, it is in all conversations. But I just want to also share with the audiences, because we have had experience, Anupam, in our education. It was not, the words were not there. But this doesn't mean that we were not concerned. This does not mean that we also experience and educated and also share with our students the complications, the challenges that climate change presents. It's just that it was in a different format. Now the word is there, right? So it became more, I mean, actually very popular to talk about climate change, but this doesn't mean that this was not addressed before. I mean, it was addressed, from my experience, it was addressed in different ways, through a poem line, through my teaching at the University of Maryland with the students. And for example, especially when talking to students, right? So through, as I said, the poem line translations, you're also empowering the people to deal with all the climate change that they are facing. But climate change has also different faces. It's not only climate, right? It impacts the society, it impacts the region, it impacts the art of living. So we have been dealing with this for a long time.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, because when we talked about, like what should we introduce about climate change in educational institutions, in curriculum, whether it is at the university level of the conservators, you realize that you had to do it in schools also. And you had to do it in, art conservation, heritage conservation across so many disciplines. So this is something that gets addressed at various levels and across the entire ecology of practice. We realize that when we're talking about climate change vis-a-vis cultural heritage, there is this conversation about, okay, how is it impacting the objects in collections? That's one part of it. So you have your usual temperature and relative humidity and, all these things. But then we also realize there's a lot of art in public spaces, which is out there in the open, right? And then at the same time, with climate change, you have very slow and cumulative effects. But at the same time, what has really impacted and why it is becoming an issue is climate change has manifested in very sudden and sharp disaster-like situations. Whether it is rainfall in areas, like for example, in India, Beatriz, so in the Ladakh area, in the northern mountains, there's a cold desert where the Himalayas, turn into these barren. Mother Earth really shows her true nature, with not a speck of vegetation on it, just the raw earth is there. It's all a cold desert. Right. And all the monasteries there with, 1,000-year-old paintings, wall paintings, are all made with clay. The precipitation there was always as snow, and now there's rain happening there.
Right.
So the monasteries which have stood 1,000 years like stone and sentinels are literally like melting, or rather, dissolving with the waters.
Right.
So these are very impactful things that are happening.
Right.
Or if you go to the east of India, the amount of rainfall in Manipur and all these northeastern states of India has become so large that there is a very strong weathering that is happening, which was not happening earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these are more like disaster situations. So disaster preparedness, disaster management is becoming very much into the fold of conservation education in India. And Absolutely. That is where I think we're going to put a thrust also.
Absolutely.
basic collections, but also that.
Absolutely. I agree with you. But at the same time, I think, as you said, it has demonstrated in very different and subtle levels, right? So when we talk emergencies, this is very clear. But I also want to bring the attention to our audiences about important things to think within the climate change concept, which is the decolonization of the environmental controls and guidance. Because, you know, from past trainings, we had those formulas, we had those standards that people used or wanted to apply to all the collections, regardless where they were and where they came from. And I think now with this idea that every region is itself, climate change brings to me also the impression that we have to get out of this formula. There is no one formula for this collection or that collection. I think we have to empower the professionals and the communities to make their own decisions in the places that the collections are placed, right? Because as you say, I mean, people who are in the desert or people who are in the mountains, they know their environment. They know what is the best for the collections. So it's important to also take this into consideration and through the education that we can provide to students and emerging professionals, empower them to have this conversation with managers, with directors at the same level, and involve the community in the preservation of their collection. I think this is actually the base for the preservation facing the climate changes.
Yeah. No, very true, but it's almost like, you know, the mother knows what's best for the child, isn't it?
Yes, true.
And those people whose cultural heritage it is really do, and we must look at them with that point of view. We must respect them for their decisions, what they take, because they're doing it. They're doing it with their heart. They're doing it with sincerity. Sometimes collections, when they move to museums and larger institutions where they become faceless in the sense of there's no direct connection, sometimes we tend to then address them in a very clinical manner, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work, you know. So I think I agree with you that we must respect these communities, because you said earlier also that people have been handling this right from ancient times. You know, there is, Beatriz, one of the largest riverine islands of the world called Majuli in Assam, in the eastern part of India, on the Brahmaputra river. It's a huge river. It is a great river. And this lovely island there has been home for centuries to the Vaishnavite sect, which also has manuscripts there. And they know how the waters rise and fall. Their manuscript repositories are also portable. They actually move them. They know when the waters and the seasons come in. So I think there's much to learn from indigenous systems and knowledges and, you know, riverine and coastline things. I think we have to look at those indigenous systems and indigenous practices and respect them and take the best from them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think more and more, my personal view is that the community has a huge part in the preservation of cultural heritage. You know, so first of all, they know the collection. First of all, the collection belongs to the community. So we as professionals need to see that and be humble enough to admit that with the community and for the community is that what we are working towards to preservation of cultural heritage. So it's a learning process, right? So I see through my students, for example, at the University of Maryland. When I assumed this current position, I quite changed some of the curriculum to include some other topics, you know, different topics as leadership, as team building, as communication, soft skills. So the conversation, of course, is about preservation of materials. However, what I ask my students to do all the time is the question why. Why I'm doing this? So we are thinking together. So we are kind of having an environment where there are no instructors So I'm trying to, I don't know, kind of inspire them to think about when they go to the professional lives, they will work with the community. So preservation is with the community. So to be sustainable, otherwise it's not sustainable at all, right?
Yeah, and no, absolutely, because you mentioned it has to be with the community, and the community is there all around us. And I mean, even the word environment in the Hindi language, it is called Paryavaran, which means something that clothes us and surrounds us completely, right? So I think a great opportunity for our, in terms of what you say from communities is, I think this in our master's program that we're going to start soon in Bombay and our other programs. One thing I think this is a great opportunity. You know, always we've done things in isolation in our silos. This is a great opportunity where art conservation comes in with nature, natural heritage conservation, which comes in with living cultures, living traditions. And I think this is time now to talk about art conservation in a very holistic manner, practically, not just as words earlier. Now there's an exigency, and there is a justification of also doing it. And there is proof that it is required. So I think we're going to take this opportunity to introduce into our curriculums this sort of, a networked education with these various sectors. And that is how, an architect once said in one of his books, I think Patrick Geddy or he said that, what is the point of having this beautiful object amidst this pile of abomination, Right. The entire Paryavaran, the entire environment, the entire thing has to have a sense of well-being, not just the individual art object, but the people living with it, their children, their sense of happiness, the music, the education.
Right.
Especially because most of our cultures, Beatriz, are in they're agrarian cultures, if you see the world as such. We are few urban centers around. And agrarian systems are also going to be impacted phenomenally with climate change.
Absolutely.
And these are the people who create the art, because heritage is also created anew every day for the future, isn't it?
Right.
I think it's interesting how this.
Absolutely. And I think as we have opportunities through institutions or universities, as you have, or as I have, for example, through Apoio Online, who has been providing professional development for thousands and thousands of people. And I see, for example, Apoio Online as a hub, as an incubator, as a safe place where all the students or people who would like to be interested in preservation or emerging professionals can practice their ideas, right? So I see as our mission also to provide this safe space for them to be able to experiment what they want to do. Simple things like, for example, an emerging professional trying to do a presentation at Apoio Online for the first time in a conference, bringing students to our regional conferences, for example. The last one that we had, the Dominican Republic, 62% of the conference attendees were students. They have, some of them, many of them actually, had never, ever presented before. So it's about providing them the chance, or also opening the way for them to present what they know, to make connections. We actually build bridges this way, right? And I believe that this is one of the important things and impacts that also climate change brings, because there is also a question about social impact, equality, and then providing inclusion, accessibility. So this all comes together for the preservation of cultural heritage. So I see as our mission, continued mission, to provide those bridges and be the bridge, right, for people to connect.
Yeah. Talking of bridges, just before before this conversation, I had asked people to generally see, and there were some of my colleagues. We sort of listed out the various efforts that people have made around the world towards this. And so there was this fantastic article by Triple Line Consulting, June Taborov and Pierre. They've made this compilation of a study on climate change and its impact and its various things. But then there've also been, so just for the benefit of everybody, because of this conversation, that list is something I'm passing on to all our students around India. So you had the UNESCO World Heritage Center, you had ICOMOS, ECROM, you had the Europa group, along with the Council of Europe. You had the Climate Heritage Network. You have in India also, the National Disaster Management Authority is being roped into this, as well as the Department of Science and Technology. They've started this program called Science and Heritage Research Initiative, SHRI, and in which climate change is going to come into it as a research topic. You have the World Monument Fund, you have the group of states, the African, Caribbean, and the Pacific group of states. So if you see, all of these people and institutions have compiled a lot of information related to. So I think we should all, and it's all accessible.
Right.
We should, the efforts by these people have been pioneers, and we thank them. And now we should take that and then use our own thoughts and experiences and start doing things.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Because my students wrote to me just now, and they said that one of them said, I actually wrote it down somewhere. She said that, what did she say? She said that I think rather, that there is enough conversation about environmental changes and everything, and about temperature and relative humidity, other than first imparting that learning properly. She says we must first work on, even as students, in terms of and as professionals, in terms of what we are doing and what is needed to do. I think if that clarity is there first, we can actually take our steps towards addressing other issues and also climate change. So right. I thought that was,
Yeah, there is a lot of information there. A lot of information that I think, and nowadays even more. And then we are trying to amplify this information with translations. We are trying to amplify this through meetings like this. But Anupam, I want to tell you something very personally. I find myself a forever student. I think we are forever learning. We have to be, I consider myself a student all the time. I learn from my students at university. I learn from my interns that have worked with me. And I learned from the volunteers that work with Apoio Online all the time. And I think this learning environment has to be protected. I always try to think that we have an obligation to build a community that is non-hierarchical, so that where everybody can talk at the same level. It's not because you're a student you don't have a voice. You have a voice. Everybody has a voice. So I try as much as I can to inspire my students to really talk. It's not because the person is a director that you're not going to share your ideas. You do know, you have your knowledge. I think we have to create this ability to communicate about what we are asking for the collections, what we are asking for preservations, and remove the hierarchical things. This also goes with institutions and all of the things. So it's not that something that is done in the USA is better than the other countries. There is no better country than any other country. So I find that preservation, each country has its challenges, and should be empowered to really preserve their own cultural heritage, and we should work towards that.
And then taking cue from what you said, I'll put in my last remark for the day. And that is that when you're talking about hierarchy and about talking, I would really reiterate, and we're going to make an effort towards that, is that this education will not cut any ice if we do not have it in the vernacular. It has to permeate the soil of the world, it has to permeate the soil of our cultures. And if we do it only in one or two predominant languages, it's not going to work. It's going to work. It is essential, but for it to really permeate like good gentle rain does, otherwise it'll be like a runoff, like these heavy rains that you have in climate change. It just takes away the soil with it. There's a big runoff and it creates gullies. and people with a lot of information, and then there are gullies where there's no information. So if it droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven, so to speak, I think it has to be in vernacular tongues, and it has to permeate here. Then it'll make an impact. And we should make an effort in our educational institutions, even if they're of a certain medium, to acknowledge the diversity of our understanding and our capacity to absorb learning, and have it in most simple, communicable, and diverse languages as possible. That's a composite culture, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it has been our mission in Apoio for over 30 years, and will continue. Believe it or not, with all the internet available, this need is still continue to empower the professionals in their own language.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beatriz. Great talking to you.
Anupam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And
I know we can talk for hours, but we don't have hours.
Yeah, good. But thank you for everybody who's been listening, and thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we have a whole bunch of questions based on what you said.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So one that's relevant to what we just were talking about is how do you provide the training materials in local languages? Do you have grants for translation, or do you rely on volunteers? Beatriz, please tell our audience how you do what you do with your magic.
Well, Apoio Online has been working for 33 years solely with volunteers. So, and it has been amazing. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers have joined us from different expertises, different languages, and have helped with the technical translations that we do. Most recently, actually about 3 years ago, we got a grant from the Mellon Foundation to help also, but all the time we continue to work with volunteers. And the volunteers from different countries, for example, different countries that speak Spanish, because Spanish is not the same in Spain or in Chile or in Argentina or in Mexico. So we try also to be inclusive in that way, having the different translations or different nuances in each language, or for example, Portuguese from Brazil and Portugal. So, and we welcome volunteers that want to join and want to help, because we try to make translations of reference texts. So like the salvage will, so emergency preparedness and response, risk management, photographic conservation, and others that we have. But that will serve as reference for the professionals in the region.
Maybe you could also talk about how you recruit your volunteers. You do go up to people on the street and say, hey, I hear you speaking Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese. Wouldn't you like to join Apoio?
No, actually, Katia, it's the other way around. People know about our mission, and this has been growing exponentially over the years. And they contact us. They contact Apoio, www.apoioonline.org, or we can put the information here, the email, and they offer their expertise in certain areas. For example, we just finished last year the translation of the REOM project, Reopen Library and Archives and Museums project from IMLS because of the COVID-19. And so we had conservators that were biologists or chemists, and sometimes not even conservators. They are from allied professions that help us with this very technical text. And I don't know if for those who don't know about this project, is they tested the impact of the coronavirus on different materials, library and archive materials, and they put all the test results so people could work safely with the collections through the pandemic and after the pandemic. So I'm glad to engage volunteers all the time.
Great. Maybe a related question. Both of you, are you seeing people from indigenous communities coming into the field, or are you recruiting from these communities to bolster the profession in different ways? Maybe Anupam first and then Beatriz.
Yeah. So when I see the Indian subcontinent, we realize that many of us are first generation urbanites, right? So we all come from villages. We all come from indigenous communities, so to speak, which have living traditions that run thousands of years, maybe. So we are a little fortunate. So while we have about maybe now 23 official languages of India, We don't have one national language. We have people from all these regions of India with their languages who have had the benefit and privilege of education, right? And these are the people who then go back and then they are at least able to communicate to a certain extent. So it's like the river that goes till there. And then as far as the little distributaries are concerned, then they tie up with local communities in different places. So yes, people are coming in. People are coming. There is this phenomenal movement that's happening in India at the moment. I think there's a great state of flux. There are people moving in from the rural areas into the urban areas. And a lot of people then from the urban areas are going back, sometimes staying back to build up their lives, which is equally justifiable. But there is this the great migration is happening. It's a very cross-cultural migration that's happening in India. And I think it's good that that's how the sugar will mix with the milk, you know, and that's how this knowledge will go around. Yeah. Sometimes with volunteers, as Beatriz said, and sometimes with people who are working, but not too much obsessed with to get a fund to be able to do it. If there is a sense of purpose to do something, then you get people to do it. I think it happens and funds come. Yeah, funds come around.
Great. And Beatriz?
And I agree with Anupam. I think the mission or the purpose speaks dear to the heart of people. And then people find purposes in doing those projects. And this is what is so inspiring to us when we see the level of engagement and purpose that people have. And so, for example, but I also see there is very little, still little awareness of what's going on in different regions. For example, I'm going to talk about the American continent, so the Latin America or Central America, or even Northern America. We have to provide more awareness of what's happening. There's a lot of wonderful projects happening that we don't know about. And once we do, then it generates joint projects with other people from different countries. Sometimes we see from the experience of Apoyo that people are doing the same project in 3 different countries. And when they come together, for example, to our regional conferences, they meet each other, they get to know each other, and all of a sudden they think, oh, why are we doing separate projects? Let's join and do together. And this has been the case, right? So the other thing so I think we have to keep providing venues and opportunities for people to share what they're doing, because it's amazing what's happening and we don't know. The other thing I think it's also important to mention that, and this is why Apoyo Online created our internship program, right? So we we have now a paid internship program that wants to foster exactly those connections. Our first intern actually did a joint project. It was from the University of Maryland and did a joint project with an indigenous community in Bolivia. It had to be online because it was during COVID, but so we involved an institution in Alaska, Bolivia, and Maryland. So this was for preservation of their collections. So giving opportunities to engage the communities, so they also feel that they can come and be heard and then present their projects, I think is continued to be our mission too.
Great. Okay, moving on. There are 2 questions, but they're kind of similar. Any tips for empowering conservators to think outside the traditional conservation rulebook and find sustainable solutions based on their own expertise? And the second question, empowerment to take decisions based on expertise rather than only following the recommendations of others is a very important aspect. How can this be reached? My answer would be get up every morning and beat your chest and say, I am great.
Well, it is, I think the colonization aspect is very intrinsic into many cultures, right? So especially colonized regions have learned to be colonized. So it's an educational process for people to feel empowered. I think, again, we'll repeat that providing venues for them, safe places for them to experiment, it's critical. And then also when we are teaching or when we are sharing information, avoid any kind of hierarchical level. So I think this will also empower people. People will feel that they are part of the decision. Making them part of the decision is one of the first steps. And don't be afraid to do it. You know, there is no perfect time. There is no perfect situation. There is no perfect environment. Just do it. I think that the important part is like being an emergency, right? So don't wait to a perfect anything. Just go and do it. And I think it's a challenge. None of us started this way. I can tell through the persons who asked. We are still learning and trying to empower people and feel that our voices need to be heard as professionals. We know that we have challenges in our own institutions to get our voices heard, but this is a process that we should do also together. So sharing this with people, having people together, doing this as a community gives you an extra power.
Can I add to that?
Of course.
So, you know, when you learn to write as children, we learn to form letters. There is A, and then there is a B, and then there is a C. There is a certain rule. There is a certain practice which you should not deviate from. And after you've learned the alphabets, you learn the sentences, then you learn the grammar, and then you learn to form an article, you learn to write. And after one has written enough, and with experiences that you gain in life, you can become a creative writer, right? Just like painters, you have to have the rigor of a discipline first. So I think even with conservation, if initially we are going by the rule book in a framework which has been put in a box by well-meaning people, then that box has been designed to give you a framework in which you can grow up to a certain level. And then you must gently, you don't jump out of the box, you know, you gently get on to a bigger area. Yeah, you don't have to be in a box either, but you know the framework that is there. And after we've got the framework, because by the time you have about 5-10 years of experience with you, and we have enough information of external factors, and with that life experience, we are able to take informed decisions, whether it is whether we should follow Thompson's book on, you know, what should the climatic parameters be in Norway and at the same time in Vietnam, or, you know, these other places. So that is up to us, but we have to be informed about that. But first, let us follow the discipline, get that armature, that structure, and then build up your muscles. Then start doing the things. Then wear those fancy clothes and, you know, style your hair. But let's get good nutrition first to get good hair and, you know, and a good healthy body and things like that. So I think there's nothing to be lost in having to follow certain protocol, because I think that is what rigor and discipline will be. And with time, you will have the freedom to spread your wings.
Absolutely, Anupam. I just want to add to that the learning process is continuous.
Yes.
So and it's the information, the technical background, and getting informed all the time is critical for anyone to be able to ask the question, why, or how can I apply this now to my collection, or why am I applying? So the question why comes also in mind to me all the time. So you have the technical information, things that you can read in a book, but then how you translate this is a translation process, right? How you translate this to your environment, to your collection, to your building is the process. So you have to have the knowledge, of course, go after every experience that you can possibly get a hold of, and then adapt to your own situation. And this will be step by step, small steps. And don't be afraid to do it. And then there will be some times where things are not going to work. And this is fine too. This is part of the process. This is part of the learning process. I think cultural heritage preservation is a learning process forever for us. We were doing things many years ago that we thought were good. We now know they're not good. And I know we're doing things now that years from now, people will say, oh, maybe this was not the best decision, but just continue learning.
Okay, I'm going to take you on a different tack. Which specific elements do you both think should be covered in training addressing climate change related issues? How can a broad understanding be facilitated, and perhaps where does this fit in some kind of a curriculum, or is it all over the curriculum?
Could you just say it just a little bit again? Just make it
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within your training, which specific elements should be covered that address climate change related issues? So how do you build in climate change into the writing process while you're training to become a conservator? Because if it's not part of the tradition of education, where do you put it now that it has become such an important part?
Should
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, I'll just say it as a response. I think what I would put it in is I would put in a lot of extramural learning in the conservation curriculum about the soil, about the water, about climate change. I would put in a book, Fritjof Capra's The Web of Life, as part of the informal reading books, you know. It gives them how things are networked, how things are there together, how these things form cycles, how intervention in one system, one point in the system can impact change there, you know. And then you realize when you have this well-informed exposure to these various things, you will be able to network any conservation intervention also in light of future risks because of climate change or other things. I think it will come naturally. So climate change would actually be an excuse to widen our learning. I don't think as a major challenge, it is like, it's almost like God given for humankind to save itself. It's become an opportunity for us to start thinking of these things. Why were we not thinking about this earlier? We've all been talking about it, but people are sitting, I am sitting on the edge of my seat talking to you, because it has precipitated a sense of urgency. And maybe that's what it was meant to be, you know? So I think it's a lever to be able to enhance our learning into a more holistic one and be more respectful about everything from human beings to nature and all of nature, all of it.
Mm.
And not be the center of things.
And the challenge becomes to us also to talk to the institutions, to include those thinking process in the curriculum, right? Because we have very formal curriculums for training. And from my experience, it was quite a challenge to introduce different things. I personally, I think it's not going to be one only topic in the curriculum. I think it would be across everything that you talk. We talk already about the building envelope, right? When we train students for conservation, but we have to expand to talk about not only the building envelope, but the region, the city, the community. What is the impact of the people on the collection? And raise those conversations because it is all related to climate change, right? So inclusivity, as I said before, and then engaging the community. It also impacts to preserve the collection during disasters from climate change. But the curriculum would be kind of expanded to think about all the things that we do, the research, the materials, the treatment, the preventive conservation, how we amplify those conversations outside the materials, outside the institution. And as Anupam said, go further, right? So learn things that are not necessarily related to conservation. A lot of things that have to do with service leadership. How do you engage people? How you work with people? It's extremely important for preservation of cultural heritage. It becomes, from my experience, one of the most important things, because it is with people and for people that we are doing this, and we are working with people. So I see this as a gradual change in the curriculums to include those soft skills that go much beyond understanding what is a paper, what is a photograph, what is a microfilm, et cetera, et cetera.
And even Beatriz, you've noticed that earlier, it was the chapters on climate and RH and humidity were always like the poor cousins in the beauty of conservation, where you're retouching and you're removing varnishes. They were the the non-flowery things, the ones that were in the background. Now they're coming in focus.
Yeah.
And the meek shall inherit the earth type. So the meek subjects are now coming over like, dude.
So maybe there's another question. What are your students concerned about most within climate change? Do certain factors interest them more than others? Are you seeing theses or papers that have a kind of focus that's not all over the place?
To be honest, sorry, please.
Go ahead. I was going to say that climate change, it's like the umbrella context. What I've seen in my students that they are looking for much more community engaged learning and understanding. So this is where the discussions are going, and when they get really intense and inspiring, because the climate change, as I said, it's the whole umbrella, and under this umbrella, they want to have a more community related training. It's more about the people right now, and we talk about, for example, the protests and the what they do to the cultural heritage and how to go about that. So those are topics and conversations that are extremely important to have during the training on my end. So those are the papers that are getting now more interesting for them to write about. Anupam, sorry, I interrupted you.
No. It was interesting that when I talk to my students because of this upcoming talk, what was very interesting is when we asked them about what is it that you would like to interact with when it comes to studying about climate change and how you would address it, it was interesting that all their logical reasonings of what to study for climate change leaned towards intangible heritage, towards living traditions, towards the creation of art, towards the raw materials. Almost nobody talked about the objects, the material physicality of the object as such, other than, about some some things about fungus and that there's growth of it. But when they were talking from the heart, when they talked climate change, they talked about the intangible aspects of cultural heritage, about the living traditions, about the communities. And they also talked about the resilience. Resilience is a word we picked up now. The adaptability of local communities to change to situations that come, whether it's on a family or whether it's in a community, and to be able to have that flexibility and the wherewithal to be able to recognize how to do it. So it was interesting. They weren't going into a small thing about how to save this object from something. They were all looking, it's sort of broadened everybody's mind, this climate change. It's fascinating how beautifully it's expanding our minds. What an opportunity for humankind.
All right. On that note, I think we will end the dialogue. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anupam, people have asked for you to share perhaps in the chat the name of the author of the book that you just mentioned. So if you could write that in the chat, everyone would be happy. And wonderful conversation. I loved it. It was very broad-ranging. And we hope that you can stay for more of today. We will see you. Thank you. And now we are going to proceed to our
Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you, Katya.
Thank you, Anupam. Thank you, Katya.
Thank you, all you lovely people. Thank you.
We'll take a short break before our speaker session to do the things that we need to do for our bodies potentially, or drink some water, etc. We will be back at the top of the hour of whatever hour you're living in at the moment. And please use this time also to suggest any breakout room themes that you would like to see after our panel discussion session or our speaker session. And I will see you back at the top of the hour. Thank you so much. Welcome back. We have our speaker session today with 3 speakers. Please don't forget to put your questions into Slido. You saw how it works if you haven't been here before just now. So your questions will be heard. And now I'd like to welcome our first speaker and our first talk with Juan Carlos Rodriguez-Reyes, who is director of the Research Center for Heritage Conservation and professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering, both positions at UTEC in Peru. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Katya. It's very, very nice to be here. Thank you very much to all for the invitation. And well, I will talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities in the development of a master's degree in preventive conservation in Peru. I know that we are focusing on conservation and going into climate change, so I decided to have a few slides, well, not that few, about climate change and in general some environmental issues we are facing in Peru before talking about our master's degree. So we will start with this. Now, those of you that don't know, Peru is one of the top countries in terms of reserves of fresh water, and of course, climate change impacts us in several ways. This is an example of one of our the most important glaciers in Peru, Pastururi, and 40% of the glaciers in general have been decreasing in the last 50 years due to global warming and other effects related to climate change. This is, of course, not immediately related to conservation, but we will see that actually this is a sign of something else, right? In terms of UV light, there's something that is very alarming. Peru is among the region in South America and in the world with the highest UV intensity. Mostly Cusco and the region close to Bolivia in the south, as you can see in the map at the bottom. The red area indicates the highest intensity in ultraviolet light, which is of course very worrying, not only for people and for and in general for society, but specifically for our heritage, especially considering that in Peru we love to have museums like open, as you can see, some canvases here like without any environmental control in the outside part of a building. So this is something that we have to focus on, and actually we do research, for example, testing pigments, evaluating them, the impact in ultraviolet light, and later seeing how they start fading the color or deterioration of the constructions that we do, the mock-up samples that we have. So UV light is something that is striking us, and again, with the changes in climate, this situation gets a little bit worse. Some of you may know about the El Niño phenomenon. This is a current from the ocean that comes from north to the south into South America, and it brings hot water. And as a result of this, it changes the environment and produces a lot of floodings, raining, and actually losses that are estimated. The last heavy one that we had in Peru, for example, it was in 2017. It was an estimated loss of $6,000 million. So this is something that affects us also tremendously, again, not only in terms of people, for example, or economical activities, but also when we think about our cultural heritage. So we have these adobe structures in the north of Peru where El Niño strikes the hardest. And we can see, for example, there are some places where you still start seeing the water coming up. And of course, weakening the structure, debilitating the structures that we have. There's some research related also to, this is not made by us, this is the reference in the bottom. There's some research also made in terms to find out how much mass you lose when you have the raining seasons, for example, for the mud. And there are some initiatives also, for example, to dry the walls using some sources of heat, for example. And this is then again something that we have to take care of. Another thing is the variability in temperature. This is a picture of Machu Picchu. I think that you all know about this magical place. This is in Cusco, actually, the place that had the highest UV radiation that I showed in the previous slide. And turns out that in places like Cusco, for example, you can have a variation in temperature in one single day of 20 degrees Celsius, which is, of course, huge and can bring, together with the UV light, together with changes in humidity, together with all the problems brought from the climate change, we can start having also some failure in structures, some failure not only in pigments or wood, but also even in stone. So this is something that is very, very difficult for us to handle. This is actually what we need to focus on. And again, Peru is one of these countries that is very, very affected by climate change. And again, not only in terms of risking the loss of glaciers, which in turn would risk the Amazon basin, whose waters start in the Andes, for example, but also our cultural heritage, whether it is stone or it is these adobe structures, or if these are pigments and so on. So this is very important for us, and it's critical for our strategies to conserve and protect our heritage. Now, a little bit about UTEC, right? We are an engineering college, and one of the first questions that people ask all the time is, what is an engineering college doing heritage conservation? So UTEC is a private university, it's a non-profit private university. We have 10 years of creation, so we are a relatively young institution. And the goal is, of course, to educate a new generation of engineers, of scientists, of people knowing the technologies that can contribute to the development of our country, whether it is developing new processes, optimizing current processes, and in particularly something that is very important about UTEC is that as it was born 10 years ago, it is a small university, we realized that we cannot do everything. So there were 4 research lines that were designed, and that are still like very promoted in the university, that include mining, water, health, and heritage. The reason for choosing these 4 areas is because these 4 lines are huge for Peru and are very, very critical and strategic for us. For example, in the area of heritage conservation, so we have a lot of archaeology, a lot of colonial art, pre-Columbian art, and so on, to mention just a few. And another thing about UTEC is that we know that we cannot do it alone. It would be impossible for anybody to do it alone. So we like to think about ourselves as a platform, and the same goes for the Research Center of Heritage Conservation. We're a platform where companies, researchers, society in general can meet and collaborate and start creating solutions, right? Now, an engineer usually offers solutions to a problem in society, and that's exactly what heritage conservation facing climate change is. So how do we do it? We decided to propose a model based on a value chain for a chain for heritage. The reference in the bottom, we published this in Studies of Conservation this year, actually. And what we started to think is how we can make a project sustainable, right? So we know that we have to identify, there has to be steps of documentation, evaluation. Later, we have to start conservation, can be preventive, interventive. Later, there should be a step of dissemination, whether to scientific community through publications in journals, for example, or to general public, which is also very important because at the end, society is the one that says what is heritage, what is not considered heritage, and what is accepted as a way to show the pride or respect to the country, right? Later it comes at the strategies for making an economic impact or socioeconomic impact, but this is a little bit beyond what we want to do. So we accompany through this process with our partners, but we focus mostly on these three portions, right? Identification and value assessment, conservation, and dissemination. This turns out to be very, very effective for us because one of the things that we need to do, also considering that we don't have a lot of funding, which is something that many countries can relate to, is that we need to be very selective for the type of project. So we started thinking about doing research and developing heritage projects, but following these steps. So we need a real and well-documented problem, not something just because I like the site or I like the object, but it has to be a real problem. There has to be a clear hypothesis for a specific agent of deterioration. We have to be able to develop a realistic methodology within our resources and our timeline, and also it has to be a potential for sustainable management or to have an economic impact. This is for us very important because based on this is that we started also developing the idea of promoting not only research projects, but also a program for a master's program where we can also teach students among other things, how to focus on projects and how to determine priorities. Okay. So before talking a little bit about the master's program, we wanted to talk about what the situation is in the region. There's a few programs in conservation. Most of them, as you can see highlighted in blue, is related to restoration and conservation, not only conservation. So they are mixed, and most of them also are related to sites and not only to objects. Okay, so in the middle of this is that we were thinking that it would be very nice to have a program, and the challenges very briefly. So this is something that a lot of people can relate to. Policymakers are not understanding that we have to protect our cultural heritage. In our countries, then, the graduate studies are not subsidized and they have a high cost. So financial sustainability is not always met. And studies in conservation, as I was telling, is often mixed with restoration and present plans not necessarily focused on preventive conservation, which could be ideal for facing challenges related to climate change. There's a few places only in Peru where you can have the bachelor's degree. So actually, for a country that has a lot of cultural heritage, we have a few places where we can do it. And usually what professionals in conservation do is to rely on short courses or workshops to keep themselves updated. Okay, so our program, what tries to do is to focus not only on the university, but also on several museum sites. And we want to educate a new generation of professionals capable of developing technology-driven strategies for collections care and preventive conservation. Now, the opportunities are endless. Every challenge has an opportunity. So the topic is relevant, is very needed, especially under the light of climate change. Within the challenges associated to our reality, each museum or site is easily a field work, is a laboratory where we have the challenges and the opportunities to do some work. Right. Also, there's no graduate programs in preventive conservation in the country. There are few in the region, so we can position ourselves in the region. And we have ties with several institutions and recognized researchers, so we want to also have a world-class master's program. Okay. The challenges, we are currently working on this, developing an attractive and modern curricula to complement the curricula with world-class professionals and to make the program financially sustainable. And here where it comes the part of developing projects that can have some support and that can translate into some impact, socioeconomic impact, okay? Briefly, very briefly, what we have done with our program, just in case you want to know, maybe I can show you this in the in this slide, we have 48 credits divided in 3 main lines. One is related to methods for organizing and conserving collections, like in general. There's a second track for material science and deterioration mechanisms, and there's a third track for research and development. Okay, now how can we do or how can we relate to climate change in this? So basically, what we start is teaching basics of accessibility, exhibition, storing, etc. Of course, in the light of climate change, in the light of environmental challenges that we have. Later, we start moving on to monitoring, control, and risk management, identification of materials, and finally, information management and documentation. From the scientific side, we go from leveraging courses to materials properties, transformation of materials in general, like technology of materials and deterioration of materials, and later some advanced topics. So this is the plan that we have. We are in the process of selecting a good opportunity to launch the program. The pandemics stopped us right when we wanted to do it, and we want again to do it in the light of our value chain model. And that is an opportunity to also mention that one of the big things that is coming also, an opportunity that for us to launch, will be 2024, which is the year where we should launch the master. We want to make it aligned with the Congress of the IIC, which will be actually in Lima, in Peru, in our university, in UTEC. So I wanted to also invite to you all for this event. And well, I know that we're running out of time, so the acknowledgements, the team of the research center here at UTEC, they are a wonderful team, and especially to Angelica Isa, Diana Castillo, and Rosana Cuon that helped with the presentation, the Office of Graduate Studies at UTEC, and our sponsors and collaborators that helped us to go through research, education, diffusion and other activities. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. Thank you. All right, our second talk is with two speakers, Alison Murray and Kyna Biggs. Alison Murray is an associate professor in the Art Conservation Program, the Department of History of Art and Art Conservation at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. Kyna Biggs is the current David Booth Fellow in Conservation Science at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Welcome. I hope Kyna is the correct pronunciation.
Hello, we would like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation to present at this exciting conference. I'm Alison Murray. I live in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and I would like to acknowledge that Kingston is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. My colleague, Kyna Biggs, is in New York City. She would like to acknowledge that New York City is located on ancestral Lenape homelands and recognize the long-standing significance of these lands for the Lenape nations, past and present. With our colleagues, Rebecca Ploger and Aaron Sugar, we have been developing an online resource called Conservation Science Education Online, or CSEO, which provides successful strategies for conveying complex scientific ideas in the field of cultural heritage science. This online resource allows information to be shared globally with the goal of improving teaching in this area. We're all conservation science educators and conservation scientists working in North America, and between us we have over 50 years of experience teaching conservation students the subtleties of science as related to the study of cultural heritage. Even with this extensive experience, we're constantly being challenged as how to ensure our students grasp the complex scientific ideas relevant to our field. Because of this, we have a long-standing interest in improving our science curricula. Many of you will share this interest. In this short talk, we will show you how far we have come with the online resource and how we would love you to be involved. The resource depends on the contributions of colleagues, and we hope that you'll consider contributing a module on specific topics. Successful conservators depend on a general body of scientific knowledge and core competencies. As educators, we have a deep interest in making sure students have a strong foundation. Our conservation students have told us that a common concern is the lack of connection between their conservation practice and their academic science courses. The science background of students entering a conservation program varies widely. They may have no chemistry at all, or a science degree in, for example, chemistry or biology. For those students with limited scientific background, the science component of the course may prove intimidating. A common concern of educators is how to break through this barrier and engage students with helpful teaching examples that make the science more approachable and less intimidating. Our online resource endeavors to provide solutions. In developing the online resource, we were guided by the approach known as threshold concepts, developed by Mayer and Land in 2003, that look at what topics are considered key to a field and that are also difficult to teach or learn. With colleagues, I've researched threshold concepts for the science taught in conservation through interviews and surveys. In a survey conducted at the 2018 annual conference of the Canadian Association for Conservation, 82 conservators identified what they found to be such difficult and useful concepts. We've underlined just a few of these concepts that might be of interest to the participants here. Solvents and solubility chemistry was identified 24 out of 82 responses as being by far the most difficult concept to grasp and also being critical in the field. It was mentioned twice as many times as the next mentioned concepts, going from theory to application and instrumental analysis. Students and early career conservators with up to 5 years of experience had difficulty with solvents and solubility, materials and their degradation, and going from theory to application, which we know is a skill learned over time. This knowledge of what students find difficult to learn can help give us, as educators, a starting point for developing new teaching strategies. How can we educators anticipate and overcome these challenges at the same time as we teach so many concepts? How can students learn all these many topics? Many conservation programs have only a limited number of educators with their own specialties, yet who have to teach a broad range of topics. With limited dedicated teaching aids like books, how can we create effective tools for teaching complex ideas, including establishing creative case studies and meaningful labs? Today, with increased global awareness and internet connectivity, we can profit from learning from one another. Not only can we see if similar challenges are being experienced by other heritage science educators globally, but we can also share successful teaching strategies. This slide shows a prototype of the CSEO resource with the first page in the center and 2 modules on the left side. The new online resource is based on peer-reviewed contributions from colleagues around the world, providing materials that can be used to assist educators in building their curricula. The resource is designed so it can be kept up to date and fluid as external resources become available. We're in the process of shifting the resource to a new platform which we plan to launch within the next couple of months with approximately 10 modules. The online resource will be free, but access will require a sign-in. The modules within the resource are designed to address a specific threshold concept or difficult topic, recognize where possible different levels of education or note the target level of education, allow instructors to tailor them to complement their teaching style and goals, highlight a teaching strategy or give an example of one that has been successfully implemented, recognize where possible different resources and variables worldwide, and include citation recommendations in recognition of the author's contribution. The resource will be developed over time through collegial knowledge with modules reviewed by an international editorial board to help promote inclusivity and adaptability of the materials. There will also be regional liaisons or editors for the online resource. If you're interested in being involved, please write to us. The resource, unlike a textbook, will be updated as necessary and will evolve, as does the field itself, through literature, productive discussions, and critical feedback. Briefly, here is more detail on individual proposed sections for the modules. Not all these sections are relevant for a module topic, but this offers a good overview of what you might consider when submitting a module. The introduction provides the hypothesis, concept, and goals and describes the student learning outcomes. Relevant references are given for the topic with free access articles and materials whenever possible. key images, which may be educational drawings or videos, case studies or appropriate examples that illustrate the topic. Supplemental information can be added, like web pages, data sets, to reinforce the topic. A section on instrumentation, which could include helpful information on interpretation, details of the plan, whether it's a lesson, teaching method, lab, course, or project. A section for methods of student engagement, which might include frequently asked questions, problematic subtopics, or points to consider to promote critical thinking. And finally, a final comment section that can include suggestions and critical feedback to promote active discussion among educators.
In working towards building the online resource, in June 2022, we hosted the inaugural online CSEO conference to promote the CSEO online resource and provide a starting point for module development. As speakers and attendees were largely heritage science educators from many countries, we hoped that the conference would provide an opportunity to learn from each other and determine how best to support each other. Before the conference, 8 invited lectures, shown here, and 18 posters with short talks from across the globe were made available to the attendees, while the conference itself was devoted to discussion among the speakers and moderators, as well as questions from the conference attendees. A range of relevant topics was presented, including talks on teaching science using indigenous philosophies and applications, and on using social media to engage students in science learning. Also included was a breakout session where speakers and attendees could connect and discuss their current teaching challenges and strategies for success. 300 people representing 58 countries registered to attend the conference, spanning from various professions and areas of interest. The average attendance for each day was approximately 100 people, taking into consideration time zone differences and the busy schedules of the attendees. Most participants came from the conservation field, either as part of training programs such as conservation science and treatment professors, or from cultural heritage institutions. But collections managers and heritage site custodians also attended, as did university and high school chemistry teachers with no official affiliation to cultural heritage. Finally, a small percentage of current students and recent graduates from conservation and science programs were also present at the conference. A set of critical needs for teaching in the field emerged from the presentations and discussions of this conference. These developed from widespread agreement from global participants facing different realities. The requirements included the development of confidence and competencies in foundational scientific knowledge and language, translating knowledge through interactive and culturally appropriate case studies and engaging examples, learning to link theoretical knowledge to treatment practice in order to support decision-making, collaborative instruction and co-teaching, and meeting the challenges of teaching failures and the unexpected, such as situations that arose during the COVID-19 pandemic. This gives just an overview of the intriguing topics and discussions that provided invaluable future directions for the online resource to follow in promoting innovative collaborative teaching strategies. As we've heard from the other talks in this conference, there is a great deal of interest in sustainable practices in conservation, and the need for these practices is imminent. We hope that the CSEO resource will be able to contribute towards more sustainable practices in 2 ways. First, as this is an open source online resource, we hope to increase the accessibility of heritage science teaching strategies, as this takes away the reliance of finding guest lecturers who might not always be easily available due to distance and to time. We also hope to include modules focused on sustainable conservation practices, some of which we've listed out here, such as climate change and its effect on collections, green solvents, reducing the carbon footprint of heritage institutions, and sustainable preventive conservation strategies. As we have mentioned, we came to this conference hoping that some of you might be interested in developing a module or modules as part of CSEO. We can see that many of you are experts in these new and important curriculum topics of interest to educators worldwide. These are just some possible topics that we've listed, but we greatly encourage suggestions from you. And we would be very happy to have conversations with you about possible collaborations. Many thanks to the people who have been supporting this project and the CSEO conference. These include Dr. Corinne Laverty from the Center for Teaching and Learning at Queen's, and Meredith Lavelle from Buffalo State College for their ongoing support since this project began. And also the colleagues who have given feedback on the resource and taken part in the research on threshold concepts. For the CSEO conference, we want to thank all the presenters and moderators who made the conference possible, the participants who enriched the lively discussions, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation for funding honoraria for the speakers, the Queen's Department of Art History and Art Conservation for supporting the conference website and for funding work study students who helped, and the Smith School of Business at Queen's for providing the invaluable technology and IT personnel. If you would like to develop a module showing successful, innovative teaching strategies, case studies, or laboratory exercises, please do write to us. We are also looking for colleagues from around the world to act as editors or as regional liaisons for the CSEO resource and future conferences. If you would like to be involved in this or in any other way, please let us know. Our contact information can be found at the bottom of this page. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. We are on to our third talk, which is with Justine Wuebold, who is currently the program manager for the Conservation of Indigenous Collections and Cultural Resources program for the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of cultural heritage. To you, Justine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good morning from my time zone. I'm Justine Wuebold, and I'm currently working with the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of cultural heritage, managing some of their grant initiatives. For this project, I was involved in exploratory research into methods for integrating sustainable conservation techniques and practices into our program's curriculum. As UCLA is a land grant institution, I would like to acknowledge that our university is located on the unceded territory of the Gabriel and Yotongva peoples, the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, which includes the Los Angeles Basin and Channel Islands. We pay our respects to their ancestors, elders, and relatives, past, present, and emerging. The conservation program was awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to research methods for embedding sustainability in our cultural heritage conservation curriculum. The program is establishing sustainability as a core perspective in the way it teaches conservation. By weaving this influence into sustainable treatment, research, ethics, and decision-making, graduates and emerging conservators will bring these skills into their practice and careers. One of the established goals of this project was to connect with our campus communities and make global connections with other conservation graduate and training programs. We have been collecting and developing teaching methods and exercises to model in the classroom and incorporate a framework for sustainability without necessarily expanding an already packed curriculum. We have applied for the next phase of a multi-year grant to implement our findings in our own program with the help of consultants, and are looking for ways to partner with like-minded programs on a study to investigate barriers to incorporating sustainability in courses. Our long-term goal is for these materials from our research to be made open access with links available through UCLA's e-scholarship platform. Our core project team includes Glenn Wharton, Chair of the Conservation Program, and Ellen Pearlstein, Professor in Conservation and Information Studies, who are co-PIs on this research grant. Our lab manager, William Shelley, has also been instrumental in researching lab sustainability and providing that context throughout the research process. We also have a wonderful advisory board, many of whom are both professors and practicing conservators. We met with them quarterly throughout the project for necessary feedback, connections, and perspectives. Prior to my appointment with UCLA Getty, I was working with Key Culture, a nonprofit organization based in the Netherlands that's dedicated to promoting action on sustainability within cultural heritage. Its broader aim is to assist all kinds of arts and culture institutions and businesses to green their practices through coaching and a set of manuals called Key Books. There's already evidence that these manuals have been incorporated into teaching programs for conservation and museum studies. Their sister organization, Sustainability and Conservation, has been developing a greener solvents project with which the UCLA Getty Conservation Program is involved as a partner. The Greener Solvents Project published this handbook in December 2021, which focuses on decision-making for organic solvents used in conservation, with the aim of reducing the amount of toxic chemicals used in conservation labs for improved human health and planetary health. The Our Ancestors Knew Best project is another example of an initiative looking into greener cleaning methods through research from traditional ecological knowledge. The aim of this project was to compile and record from 10 countries in Southeast Asia a basic understanding of traditional methods in textile preservation, including natural cleaning agents and solutions that are cost-effective and eco-friendly. These include seeds, bark, leaves, roots, and juices used as textile surfactants and detergents and for warding off pests. This information was then translated into accessible conservation data through plant database tables and recipes that can be applicable to modern-day conservation. It is also important to note that the longer-term goal of this project aligns with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, of which number 12, responsible consumption and production, is the most compatible. Finding this balance between protecting people, the planet, and the object is essential for working towards sustainable methods of collections care. One of the next stages of the project is a collaboration with UCLA Getty to bring this research to North America. We have given a workshop on plant-based pest control for ATOM, the International Conference for Indigenous Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Please reach out to me if you know anyone who might be interested in contributing plant specimens to this ongoing project. Our program has dedicated conservation and research laboratories for students and faculty at the Getty Villa in Malibu. The labs are located in a purpose-built building where students are able to take classes and do their practical work in 2 large laboratory spaces for equipment used in teaching and research. Our lab at the UCLA Coates Institute of Archaeology contains microscopes and is additionally equipped for metallographic sampling and analytical instrumentation for inorganic analysis. In the summer of 2020, UCLA Getty invited Caitlin Southwick, who you heard from earlier in the conference, founder of Key Culture, to give a workshop on sustainability and sustainable practices in the cultural heritage field. In conjunction, the students worked on a sustainability report detailing findings from their investigations into environmentally friendly lab practices and materials. As recommended by the student report, our lab manager has been exploring different programs for lab certification and ways to migrate the lab's material waste, or mitigate the lab's material waste. One of the programs on campus, UCLA Green Labs, conducts a comprehensive assessment of UCLA's lab practices and provides recommendations on how best to reduce your environmental impact. Another certification, My Green Lab, includes a self-assessment to gauge a lab's sustainability practices and help implement changes. Another one we're really excited about is the LEAF program from University College London, which is now available for any research institution looking to improve their sustainability, including outside of the UK. We were pleased to find that the certification program is also in use at the Northumbria program, so perhaps it will catch on to more graduate programs. Looking to locally available resource redistribution sites can be a helpful way to get cheaper for equipment and materials. Our local one is MuseoCycle, which is a network specifically for museum professionals interested in circular material reuse. Our lab was able to source laboratory equipment secondhand from the Getty Conservation Institute. So checking with your partner institutions before disposing of equipment can save a lot of money and mind materials. Some of our students and faculty were involved with building the STITCH project. Sustainability Tools in Cultural Heritage is a life cycle assessment carbon calculator and library of case studies and information sheets funded by the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation and the National Endowment for the Humanities. They are working to upload a number of resources to their new webpage, which can help compare materials based on the carbon emissions involved in their manufacture. We hope to incorporate it into our student projects as a way to research the environmental sustainability factor of the experiments and treatments they undertake. While this project to embed sustainability in conservation education was first conceived as an environmental sustainability initiative that would focus on greener treatments and collection storage, it has certainly evolved to be much more intersectional in our approach. I started conceptualizing the overlaps by laying out some of the sustainability factors that affect conservation within the 3 pillars of sustainability, and of course noticed the many intersections that make this a multidimensional puzzle. The Venn diagram helps illustrate these intersections between aspects of sustainability, and at a broader level, organizing them into a mind map, which clusters related ideas together, is also a great way to perform a check of who might be missing in the conversation. Looking into the idea of thinking intersectionally and holistically, I was curious about the origin of the term and found some interesting history about the overlap between racial and gender identities advocated by Professor of Law Kimberly Crenshaw and her theories of intersectional feminism, which later inspired the intersectional environmentalism movement. The decisions involved in conserving heritage are likewise interconnected between the welfare of the object and relinking the intangible heritage of objects and sites to their respective communities and cultural context. Issues involving the disappearance of culturally relevant sites and monuments in disaster-prone areas continuously affect marginalized societies, especially those who do not have the financial capacity to prevent future catastrophe and adapt to the changing landscape. Here I've listed some intersectional mindsets, systems thinking, future thinking, and incorporating multiple perspectives, which translate to core competencies in sustainability education. Systems thinking is often used in business contexts to develop a self-diagnosing and evolving organizational culture that thinks critically about the way operations are facilitated based on stocks in and flows out of a system. This can be tangible, such as goods, or intangible, such as information. Interventions to the system can have distinct effects depending on where the change takes place and how much leverage is applied. The interrelationships between moving parts are key to seeing dynamic patterns of change rather than simply the parts themselves without any context of function. By understanding the whole system, these complexities are more manageable and alterable. Future thinking works in tandem with systems thinking to consider the outputs or consequences of our system. The impact of our decisions we make now are felt generations into the future. Some references in the literature were made to backcasting, or imagining the future you want and then systematically working backwards to plan a path forward. But of course, this can't be accomplished if the system and its moving parts are not first understood. And these moving parts are not inanimate, of course, so the idea of incorporating multiple perspectives plays an important role. Frameworks for integrating the Indigenous concept of two-eyed seeing have been woven into many university programs, notably in Canada. The focus is put on our relations to one another for interconnected learning, creating awareness and exploration across knowledge systems for a trans-systemic approach. This involves exploration of new perspectives and finding innovative ways to be interdisciplinary, adaptive, and resilient. My research has also included over 70 interviews with educators and practitioners in sustainability and in a variety of cultural heritage disciplines. We developed and field tested some of the classroom exercises in Professor Pearlstein's collections management class, which is a course available to both conservation and information studies students. The exercises included scenarios having to do with sustainable local procurement, insect ID for pest mitigation, and communication strategies for emergency preparedness. The overarching project for the quarter was a collection survey of physical objects from Southeast Asia, which students assessed for a hypothetical loan to the Philippines as part of a fictional exhibition. I also participated in one of Professor Wharton's medals class, helping do initial research on a project the students worked on, testing natural corrosion inhibitors and bringing in a guest speaker from the GCI who is performing research on greener solvent alternatives. We are hoping that through these kinds of projects and interactions, students will be interested in forming green teams that collaborate with sustainability officers and facilities managers in their future institutions. Or should they go into private practice, bringing this awareness to their clients. Sorry, just a moment. While all the faculty and staff in our program are passionate about sustainability and looking to be more involved with incorporating new teaching methods, we recognize that not all programs have this influence. This was made more apparent through our anonymous survey, which was designed to collect data on sustainability curricula in conservation and cultural heritage preservation programs on a more global scale. I worked with our digital archaeology lab to develop and run this survey in September last year, and they were an amazing help in defining our survey questions to get the results we were looking for, and in analyzing data for designing visualizations. The survey included questions to help evaluate different strategies for bringing sustainability into program curricula, such as through activities, guest lectures, and site visits, whether sustainability is taught as a separate course or integrated, and which sustainability pillars are represented. The freeform commentary asked about barriers to embedding sustainability, which in some cases resulted in anecdotes about bureaucratic limitations and conflicts, staffing time and resources, and difficulty adopting new techniques or methods due to apathy or lack of testing for certain materials. Out of nearly 100 participants, not including a couple dozen partially filled surveys, you can see that more than half of the respondents include sustainability topics in their curriculum, with 68% integrated throughout. I included the top choices for our question on lab sustainability initiatives as well, which align pretty well with our own lab goals. While much of the resulting data was expected, it was great to see that these responses from 21 countries, reflecting a broad international interest and a mutual understanding of the difficulties we face in moving the field towards considerations about climate change and making sustainable decisions for our workplaces. While this phase of the project has ended, there's so much potential that's been uncovered in this exploratory phase. We evaluated the needs of cultural heritage programs to change and evolve, assessing gaps in our knowledge and challenges for integration. We have recently applied for the next year of the Research and Development Grant, focusing on identifying barriers in the field and in education institutions and developing methods to mitigate those barriers. Next would be planning the design of curricular materials and a platform for them to live on. We have also been meeting with potential collaborators on campus, working to build bridges between our program and humanities, sustainability sciences, and diversity centers at UCLA. And we have our paper is published in Studies in Conservation, so please check that out. There were many more people involved in this research effort who have contributed mightily to this project, and hopefully we'll be able to invite them back soon to collaborate. Thank you so much for your attention, and please reach out if you have any questions.
Great, Justine, tour de force. All right, I'd like to invite all of the other speakers to come into the speakers arena, virtual speakers arena, so that I can start popping questions at ya. Wonderful. Let's wait for a moment. So, okay, now we have everybody front and center. The technical team kind of wanted to apologize to you that your name was auto-corrected to Kyra on on the chat, so they apologize for that.
That's okay, no worries.
Great. All right, we will start out with Juan Carlos. Top question, considering the special conditions of Peru, how do you rate the resilience of museum buildings for the protection of their cultural heritage?
That's a good question. So resilience of museum buildings in Peru depend a lot on their location and of course on their budget. As I was telling you in the presentation, in the north of Peru, for example, where we have floodings, where we have different issues, it is not well prepared. Buildings are not well prepared for floodings, especially field museums. We have a lot of field museums because of the archaeological sites that are present, the pre-Columbian sites that are in the north of Peru, and they are not very well prepared. Modern museums built in Peru are better prepared, of course, but in general, I would say that museum buildings are at stake in case of floodings, earthquakes, and fires. And unfortunately, of course, the same happens for the collections that we host.
Okay, thank you. All right, Alison, Kyna, is there a networking aspect to CSEO, or is it mainly an online resource?
So it's mainly an online resource, but part of the resource that we really wanted to incorporate and that we're doing is creating that networking. So on the online resource itself, we have a comment section where we facilitate and encourage people to have those open dialogues and discussions. And then, like the inaugural conference, we're hoping to have regional liaisons that will host their own CSEO conference every few years or something like that. That would help also have those networking opportunities, as well as coming to conferences like this and sharing our ideas and collaborating with others as well. Alison, I'm not sure if you want to add anything.
No, that's
else.
great. Yeah.
Thanks. All right. Justine, is benefit sharing with people providing traditional knowledge part of the Our Ancestors Knew Best project? This could be capacity building, this person says.
In the original Southeast Asia project, they had their researchers that were working were from those areas, and many of them were indigenous. So it was beneficial to the communities for sure to have this this traditional knowledge saved somewhere, because it would seem that the future generations weren't appreciating the knowledge and continuing its use. So it was a matter of trying to make sure that it had practical application for those who live there as well. And in the current iteration, the project is still in its infancy, so we're still trying to connect with communities and figure out how they can be used within communities to sort of share among communities, among the people, different tribes. And so we're still building that capacity in, but it is definitely in the plan.
Great, thanks. All right. Juan Carlos, can you put your microphone up? Some people are having trouble hearing you. Or can
Yes, I
you
wanted to
just put it
apologize.
inside your mouth?
Is this okay now?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
I'm sorry. The thing is that so I have
Don't
this
worry.
thing and it was like I don't know, it was up down instead of close to the mouth. So yeah,
Don't
I'm
worry.
sorry.
I'm just going to eat mine so you can all. All right. Second
Too much
question for you.
technology for me.
I know. The value chain model for decision making looks extremely helpful to support sustainable solutions. Are others already using this in heritage?
That's a good question. So I believe they may be using it because it's something that is very, I would say even logic, right? So the idea of following, starting, identifying, or giving some value to an object, and later designing the strategies for conservation, later dissemination, and finally to put it to as part of a scheme for some socioeconomic impact. I think it's the logic flow. Our contribution in any case, if any, is to place this in paper and put it to work. And actually in the publication that we have, we showed how we use it to investigate, to study several objects, including gilded coppers, colonial paintings in Peru, altarpieces, organic matter, etc. So I would say that I hope that there's a lot of people using it, or in any case that they start using it.
Okay, great. For Alison and Kyna, is decision-making for sustainability already identified as a threshold concept for conservation education?
So thank you for that question. Right now, in the work that we've done, we haven't had that come up as a threshold concept. Kyna will explain a little bit maybe why that's the case. Threshold concepts have been applied to so many different fields, from engineering to medicine. So I'm sure sustainability has come up in other fields, but threshold concepts is relatively new in the field of conservation. But we certainly would love to have a module on any of the topics that have been brought up. Yeah.
Great.
And I'll just add, if that's okay. I was thinking when I saw that question come in, I was thinking about what was mentioned in one of the sessions from, I believe it was the first day, where the effects, the immediate and disastrous effects of climate change aren't really being seen in the more northern hemispheres as much as they are in the more southern ones and around the equator. And for a lot of our interviews or the surveys that we've done in our initial research for threshold concepts, there have been interviews with those in those regions that are more immediately affected, but by and large, it's mainly been from Europe or North America or whatnot. And so when that thought was brought up, and that the immediacy for thinking about climate change maybe isn't as present in those northern hemispheres as opposed to the other regions, I was thinking that maybe that is also contributing to the fact that we just haven't seen that come up as a threshold concept. But I think with initiatives like this, we're obviously seeing the importance of it. And I think it is very important to include modules about that in our resource, because it's going to start very clearly dictating our practice in the field in very many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we tried to get as much of the globe in this conference as possible. And sometimes politics comes in the way of whether you can find the right people. And so we've done a good job, but next time we'll do better. And often it's complicated to get also through linguistic barriers, people that you want to be at the table in the same way as an equal participant without having to have simultaneous translation, etc. So all of these practical things are sometimes at play when you're doing studies or when you're having conferences. Okay. All right, Justine, have conservators started to use the traditional materials on artifacts yet? Have you come across barriers to using them?
So one of the people who's working on the project with us, Lillian, is working in Mexico at the NCREAM program, and she's testing the materials directly with artifacts and finding excellent results for the most part. We haven't begun to test for the pest mitigation as much, but we're still sort of pulling together the resources to be able to do that. And we definitely have somebody in our program who's actually working in the PhD on testing materials for insect mitigation. So yes, they are in practical application, and we're planning on continuing that. And as far as barriers, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to respond to that, or any issues that we've come across in as far as lab time, but we're definitely not everyone is willing to share their knowledge, so that's something that we've come across as far as consultation, and so that's something we're trying to work through, how best to approach the community, and through that ATOM conference seemed to be a really good venue to be very open about sharing both ways, and seeing, sort of gauging the climate of how much is too much to ask of people, especially if the project is not yet funded.
Yeah. All right, Juan Carlos, do you adapt your teaching when traditional conservation materials in Peru are not always available? Maybe
Yes, that's
traditional is
something.
the wrong word. Let's say.
Exactly. I was going to say, I was going to ask, when we cannot have traditional materials, we use traditional materials. But yeah. No, I mean, I think that it's related to commercial or standard materials, let's say. And yes, so
Materials made in the global north.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that are really expensive to import.
Exactly. Yes. Actually, that's part of the answer, right? So in Peru and in other countries, I am sure some materials are not easily obtained, whether because of logistics or because of limitations in funding. So it's in some cases we need to adapt to what we have, right? So people in our country look for alternatives, including materials based on the traditional knowledge that we may have. Now using traditional in the right sense of the word, right? Um, Angelica Isa, who was also speaker in this conference, for example, was leading a team trying to develop a material that could help as a biocide, and using some extracts from plants that are traditionally known in Peru for as repellent of insects, for example, right? They were placed in a polymer, and this is part of one research project that we had. But I use this as an example because in general, I think that the short answer would be, yes, we use alternative materials, but it is important to make sure that there's a formal research done to make sure that these alternative materials, of course, are not harmful to the objects that we are trying to conserve. So part of what we are trying to do from our master's degree actually is to make sure that we recognize all these alternatives as and all these ideas as something that are, of course, respected, but that need to be tested in order to be applied rightfully. So yes, that would be the answer.
But that also creates more research projects.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think, I mean, from my knowledge of funding in the global north, they're very sexy research projects. So
Yes. No, it is something that is very, very important, and it's a matter of giving a twist of to the challenge that you're facing, and trying to again build something with a sound scientific foundation, like something that is very rigorous and that will be followed not only by previous experience or traditional knowledge, but also with data. So that's important. And it also constitutes a very, very attractive, sexy proposal in the South also. So yes.
great. I'm just thinking about money.
Oh yeah, no, that's what we need to do. Otherwise we yeah.
All right, Alison and Kyna, do you already have climate change or sustainable conservation as a topic within the CSO resource, and what aspects are covered?
We don't have one completely devoted to that, and as I said before, we'd love to have a modules on those topics. But one module that Rebecca Ploger has developed is on polymers, and it came from a situation where one of her students was on an internship in Egypt and wanted the right glass transition temperature for a certain polymer. And she didn't have a DSC, she didn't have like high-tech equipment, so she had to use, so they used, their site, their feel, to develop a mixture of polymers that would be appropriate in the internship site, which was in Egypt. So I think we really want to try and open up the topics and sort of be aware of the differences globally when we have modules, to have, thinking about maybe people don't have certain equipment. So maybe we'll give data sets for people to be able to have practice with certain techniques. So we're trying to open it up so people from all over the world in all different realities can use the resource.
Right. Kyna, do you want to add? Okay.
Alison covered all of it.
Great. Okay, I think we are looking at our last question for this round before we break for the breakout rooms, which is for Justine. What soft skills do conservators need to be able to have to work sustainably in their context? And can these be taught? If so, how?
I know that research has been done on this at other graduate programs. papers given that are excellent, and so I'm definitely gleaning from some of those. When I say that, it's this sort of business mindset a lot of the times, like with the systems thinking and relating to clients and things like that, because that all relates with whether you're an institution or not. And I think bringing in some of these, how to collaborate with people, can be brought in through group exercises and working with communities. And we definitely want to make sure that internships and opportunities that are outward facing with communities, and not just within conservation, we don't want to create that silo. So I feel like these are the sort of skills that are trying to be brought into the programs. All of them, as far as I can tell, have some component of soft skills, but being able to relate this with sustainability, environmental issues is sort of the challenge we're up against. How they can gain these through practical experience working on projects. So since we are a lot of archaeological materials in our program, the students tend to go international and work directly with communities. So we see a lot of this in our program, of them working both in the US and internationally, and developing these soft skills in their internships and working on their theses. So it's definitely possible and should be a strong component of conservation education.
Maybe I can open it up to everybody else. I think what we heard this earlier today from Beatriz Haspo is that languages are of extreme importance. So I'd ask you, Juan Carlos, Alison, and Kyna to opine on this question as well. If you have thoughts about soft skills or other non-conservation related skills that can really benefit an approach that considers climate change and sustainability. Juan Carlos, I see you.
Yes, as a non-conservator, I can tell that I think that the biggest soft skills of all is the desire to continue learning. I mean, it is important to make sure that we are very open to learn a little bit about, I don't know, how to measure the rain, ultraviolet light, about learning, I don't know, polymers, about materials, about art history, about archaeology and different things. I think that the greatest asset and the most challenging thing for conservation in this century is going to be to have people willing to learn, and another thing is willing to recognize that their own field of expertise is not at the center of the universe, right? So we are at the center of the universe. If we have to place something, is the object that we want to take care of, and all the other sciences, disciplines, and everything work collaboratively to create this, right? So that's my take.
I'll say that I think recognizing what experiences and abilities our students come into the programs with is so important. So I'll say, just for an example, we have one student in first year who has worked for Natural Resources Canada, being an energy advisor assistant and an energy advisor. So she's provided assessments for homes and buildings for energy efficiency and heat loss modeling. So I think that's so exciting. I mean, this is just one example, but I think we can learn so much from her. And so I think it's taking advantage of anything that comes, any opportunities that come like that. And I think for sure the students, I want to echo what's already been said. I think that students really have to see their learning as lifelong learning. Maybe they don't get something at one point, but they will in the future. And we can see from our own careers as well how things change and modify. And so those are my comments. Kyna.
I also just want to add on to what everyone is saying with the lifelong learning and trying to think out of the box. I think one of the more important soft skills is also just being curious and staying curious and not having that fear of, oh, well, what if this isn't the way things are done? Or what if this doesn't work out? Who cares? like try things, be curious, you know, and that kind of goes into that lifelong learning. Like you're never going to be fully knowledgeable about everything, and that's great. That's not just okay, that's amazing, and that should be really like embraced, right? So
Oh my gosh, all the love, all the love. Now we're almost at the end, but not quite. This might be the most important part of all. Thank you to all of you for your wonderful papers. And now we're going to shuttle you into breakout rooms where you can talk with the people who are your super fans. And if you want to be a super fan of someone else, then maybe you can switch break rooms as well. We will give you about 2 minutes to do whatever you need to do. And then when you come back, you can choose a breakout room at the bottom of your screen where you want to be. And we will close the breakout rooms and bring you back into our collective space at 45 past whatever hour you are at. And then we'll have some closing remarks from our team. Thanks so much, and see you in the breakout rooms.
Thank you very much.